And the question today is, did Chris Chibnall do justice to the centenary of the BBC?
That's a very grand question.
It is indeed.
And we shall, within the next probably about 40 minutes, be trying to answer that question.
And the reason for that is because Doctor Who returned with its big bombastic finale to the Jodie Whittaker era and the Chris Chibnall era as a result. And today we will be unpacking everything about the power of the Doctor and talk a bit about the Chris Chibnall era as a whole, which I think it's no secret to say off the bat that neither of us have been a fan. And we'll be talking a bit about why, whether the finale did a good job of closing off the doors of this era, and looking forward perhaps to what lies in the future of this strange and wonderful greatest show in the galaxy. Indeed. We left a bit of silence there.
Yeah, we did. So I wasn't expecting you to come to me there. So so that's the main thrust of the show. It's been the first show we've done for a few weeks. It's the first time we've gathered together for a while with your sort of change of location.
Indeed.
But it's good to be back, and it's good. There's nothing that normally inspires our juices, so to speak, more than a episode of Doctor Who, and we've over the years we've loved some, we've hated some, we've been bored by some. So it's always interesting to see which way we go this time. I think last time we did a Doctor Who special, we were bored crapless.
It's very much the foundations of our podcasting, isn't it?
It is indeed. So, Power of the Doctor.
Yeah.
It's difficult to sort of, without giving away too much as to whether you like it or you don't like it. Did you like it or didn't you like it?
Did I like it or didn't I like it? Well, it's a tricky question, I think, because I think you could view Power of the Doctor on two fronts. I think you could view it on one as a celebration of Doctor Who, as a celebration of the BBC, as a celebration of the past 60 years of this sci-fi programme that we all love, or me and we like it. But I think on one hand you could view it as a very successful celebration of Doctor Who, a very fan servicey mess of a celebration that brings in loads of old things, loads of big bombastic things that will mean a lot to Doctor Who fans. And I think in a way it works under the same mechanisms as, say, the Five Doctors or the Time of the Doctor, where it just intends to be this massive celebration of Doctor Who. But on the other hand, you could view it as a piece of television and a piece of media, and it does not work on that front. I'll tell you that.
No, I would say there was probably about 85 minutes worth of mess, but a really good final 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think you could view... You could look at how successful the regeneration sequence was, how successful a few of the cameo sequences were. But then on the other hand, you could look at it as a piece of television, and it wasn't very coherent. It was probably the biggest mess of a TV episode that you could ever imagine watching.
I don't know about that, because I watched the previous series was Flux, which to me was the messiest thing I've ever seen ever. Okay, let's break this down a little bit. 3 things that worked and 3 things that didn't.
Okay. I think you could say that Chibnall did the regeneration right.
Yeah.
The final few moments were very subtly handled, I think. Yeah. And the transition that we saw at the end of the episode, there will be spoilers coming up here. The transition was well done between Jodie Whittaker and the next actor, the 14th Doctor. I would say that Tegan and Ace generally were. I mean, their role was probably a little bit unnecessary in a way, but generally they were characterised well,
Yeah,
and their reunions with certain characters were well handled.
yeah.
And I would say the whole vibe of it acting as a commemoration, a celebration of Doctor Who history, it worked well in that respect.
Okay. So, shall I comment on those before you go into the three things that
Yeah.
didn't work? Can you just remind me in one line what they all were?
Well, I said the celebratory nature, the regeneration, and Ace and Tegan.
Okay, so let's start off with Ace and Tegan. I particularly liked Tegan in it, actually.
Yeah.
It was never a companion that I particularly liked, but yeah, I thought they handled that really well. It wasn't an essential part of the story, but it was quite. Any other time, I don't think it would have worked, but for this particular episode, with it being a sort of celebration of the BBC and of Doctor Who, I think it worked. It worked pretty well. Let's face it. It was absolutely bursting with Easter eggs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Some of them were done quite well. Some of them just felt unnecessary. Was there? I mean, perhaps we'll come on to this in a minute. But was there any real reason why this had to have the Master, Daleks, and Cybermen in it? Because it seemed as though you had probably the three most dangerous villains that the Doctor's ever faced. I can't think of an episode that's felt that much less threatening.
Well, if you look at it, what did the Daleks and the Cybermen actually do? I mean, we've seen the Daleks and the Cybermen pop up way too many times in the last few years.
Yeah.
And here they were just reduced to being there in the background, looking a bit pathetic.
But I'm not entirely sure what the storyline was.
There wasn't really one, was there?
No. And I'm not really... I mean, what was the whole purpose? The whole sort of anti-regeneration thing.
Yeah. What was the master scheme there?
I mean, it just seemed to be that he was going to turn into the Doctor so he could twat about. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. So that he could mess about pretending to be the Doctor, causing loads of destruction and sort of ruining the image of the Doctor. It just seemed a bit OTT to me.
I think because there was so much going on at the same time, we never really got to see that. I mean, that would be quite a good idea for a plot, wouldn't it? But it just didn't work.
I think actually there were a lot of good ideas in this episode, and if that wasn't a single episode, and it had been a series, I think you could really go with it. But the problem is, and I'm going to say that thing which I was feeling very proud about when I was talking to you earlier on. But to me, the Chibnall era feels like Doctor Who for the TikTok age.
Yeah.
Because it just feels like lots of really small nuggets of stuff that are happening at a real breakneck speed and then pulled together into a single episode.
You say that it would have worked as a season, but then you look and you think... You look at Flux. You look at how that was a whole season dedicated to that, and that didn't work.
Yeah, but that was because it was delivered in such a messy way, wasn't it? Because
but so would this have been if it was a
it
season.
probably would have been, just because we don't have much faith in Chris Chibnall, doesn't it? But to me, that's how it feels to me. It feels like loads of ideas, some of which are quite good, some of which aren't, but he just throws too many of them at everything that he does, and it turns out to be sort of something which is, to be honest, for 75 minutes of that was pretty unwatchable.
It was, yeah.
Now, there are some exceptions to that. I don't know whether we want to go into those now or not, because I've not asked you three things yet that you think are good. In fact, I'm going to ask you those now, rather than go into the
3 things I didn't like.
the 3 things. Oh yeah, you said the 3 things you liked. Yeah, 3 things you didn't like.
Okay, I think I'm gonna fall quite similar to where you are. I would say the plot,
Mm-hmm.
because that's quite an obvious one. There was no real plot,
Yeah.
and the way they convicted the plot was not particularly admirable.
Yeah.
The way that the Daleks and the Cybermen were reduced to being background parts, and
Yeah.
and the I'd say just the handling of the big 3 villains.
Yeah.
And I know I'm treading on some of your points here. And the pacing.
Yeah. Which has been a problem really throughout the whole of the Chris Chibnall era. hasn't it?
So we start off the episode, and there's quite a compelling opening sequence.
Yeah. Probably one of the best that we've had from the Chibnall era, actually, because I usually hate his intro scenes, so I usually find them quite embarrassing, whereas this one actually worked quite well.
It was quite exciting. It got us into the episode really quickly. But then immediately afterwards, we have so much stuff bombarded at you. It is sensory overload.
Mm.
I think if you were someone who suffered from autism, this would be a real struggle to watch it. And I'm not saying that
I found it quite a struggle to watch, and I don't.
I know, me neither. I say that because I saw someone say that they had sensory overload and they were autistic.
Yeah.
And you look at it, I mean, immediately, the first scene, we're in Russia, and then the next minute we're randomly in this museum, and there's all these paintings disappearing. I mean, what was the painting disappearing thing about, really?
And what was the point of Vinder?
Yeah.
And then there's, when you're talking about sort of like quick thing, there was one moment when he was outside, and all of a sudden he was in the TARDIS.
The same happened with the Master. There were a lot of skipped scenes.
Yeah. Probably because they filmed too much, because they were trying to build a coherent story and ended up having to edit it down to fit into a 90-minute package. There were a couple of bits that worked really well for me. The opening sequence,
yeah,
which wasn't brilliant, but it just felt like quite an exciting opening sequence without being embarrassing.
Yeah.
The moment when, and there's spoilers, there's loads of spoilers, I'm not going to say that. The moment when Tegan met the hologram of Peter Davison's Doctor, that was really well done.
Yeah.
And if it had been done the other way round, you'd had Ace meeting Sylvester McCoy's Doctor, it would have been equally as good, but it sort of lost its edge really, but when it sort of did it the second time.
Yeah.
And then probably the highlight of the whole thing for me was the moment when the quiz show host guy, Bradley Walsh, when his character has set up this club of people that have met the Doctor before, so like a little private club where they can talk stories, and you had a number of old companions in there, and actually Chibnall did that really subtly, which isn't something that he ever does ever. I mean, in this episode, at times there was so much exposition, wasn't there? As there always is. But it was as bad as ever. But for those few moments, that was done so well that I kind of got a feeling that it might have been RTD, not Chibnall.
Yeah, it might have been
as part of the regeneration scene. I also thought that the final scenes between Jodie's Doctor and Yaz were actually really strong.
They were surprisingly subtle, weren't they?
Yeah, and her actual regeneration was possibly the best regeneration for quite some time.
Yeah, I think so. I think it did feel like it happened quite suddenly.
Yeah.
But when it did happen, it was quite a satisfying moment. I would say that as a Doctor Who fan, I should have come away from this episode feeling really hyped, really excited. But instead, I came away quite empty because of how much was being thrown at you.
Yeah.
So you had the classic Doctors pop in, you had the classic companions pop in, you had Ruth pop in, you had Graham pop in,
yeah,
and all of these things are happening at the same time.
yeah.
And if you had some of them happen, then it probably would be quite an exciting sort of punch the air moment.
Yeah.
But it loses its effect when it's just every 5 minutes that a character's popping into it.
Yeah, you're right. Because if they'd have just done, if they hadn't have had all of the other pop-ins, and they'd just had the bit at the end where Bradley Walsh's character goes in, and you had all of those characters, you know, sat there in that club, that would have probably been tingly nearly to the extent that your body started tingling when Tom Baker came in for the last anniversary episode, because that was the only time it did it. Whereas here, you're right, we had this sort of force down our throats all the way through, and then sometimes it did it quite well, but it just never felt particularly subtle.
And it's quite a beautiful moment, I think, when quite a subtle moment when we have these characters meet up with Graham. I think it's quite a nice idea, and you can imagine that the companions would meet up.
Yeah.
In real life, and I think that was a lovely idea, and I'm glad they weren't. We heard rumours for a long time that characters like Mel and Ian and stuff like that and Joe would pop up, but I thought they were going to actually pop up in the storyline. You know, they were going to be there, and they were going to kick some Dalek and Cyberman arse.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they didn't, because that would have been an absolute mess. So the way they handled that was really nice.
Yeah.
But it was just let down by the fact that we had so many more moments before that were trying to be equally thrilling.
Yeah. No, I honestly think that the last 5 minutes of it were probably the strongest that we've had from the Chibnall era. But to be fair, the preceding 85 minutes were pretty damn messy.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, we haven't been a fan of Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor. This was her final hour. How do you feel she did?
I thought she did okay.
Was she as annoying as usual?
Not really, but there wasn't really very much for her to get her teeth into, I don't think. So, you know, it was, I don't know, it felt, I think I said to you at some point during it, this feels like a little bit like a pantomime, and that sort of sums it up for me, really. And Jodie was a leading part of that pantomime. I
think so. I thought she was actually quite good here compared to what she usually is. I've never been a fan of her performance as the Doctor. I've never really imagined her as the Doctor. But here, she handled it quite well, I think. So, surprises for me. The first one being that Dan was in it at the beginning and then disappeared. Presumably, he must have had other stuff in his work schedule, I guess. I reckon so. Or Chibnall thought there's no point to Dan. Which is probably what certainly was my view from Flux. He was a likeable character, but he had no point. What actually was the point of Dan? Well, there wasn't, was there? But there wasn't the point to many of the characters. What was the point of Vinda? Yeah. I reckon Vinda was originally going to be Captain Jack. Yeah, I can see that. Because of the way that Captain Jack popped up in Revolution of the Daleks. Yeah. And then it seemed like it was going to be Captain Jack was going to come back because they left it open. Yeah. And then he never did. So... and then obviously we had the John Barrowman situation, which really, contextually, the John Barrowman situation meant that Captain Jack couldn't come back.
Yeah.
So
I'm just looking at before the show started. We wrote down a handful of predictions.
yeah,
So I'm going to remind you of yours.
yeah,
So Sylvester McCoy and Peter Davison will appear.
yeah.
So you're spot on. Did you think that was going to happen? Had you heard rumours of that?
I'd heard rumours, but I thought it was going to happen anyway. Even if
Yeah.
I hadn't heard those rumours, I thought Ace and Tegan are back. They're definitely going to have a reunion
Yeah.
with the Doctors. But we also got Paul McGann back. We got Colin Baker back, and
Yeah.
we got David Bradley back.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. You also said Osgood was going to return, which didn't happen.
I'm surprised by that.
But she's such a good character. I'm surprised we've not seen her come back.
I don't. They never really explain what happened to her.
No. Tegan and Ace will get their fan lines, and you were right there.
Yeah, I mean, we saw them basically reduced to their fan servicey things. I knew that the Doctor, one of the Doctors, was going to say Braveheart Tegan at one point.
Yeah.
I knew that we were going to get
Ace with
a baseball bat and a costume and everything like that.
Yeah.
And we got so many cameos like that. We got an Adric reference.
Yeah.
It was the most fan servicey thing you could ever imagine watching.
Yeah.
You could say that was a positive for some people, but it did feel like you were watching fan fiction.
Yeah, it did. You also said that the Ruth Doctor was going to come in at the end, and you weren't quite right, but you were sort of right. She definitely did come back.
She did. I thought she was going to have a save the day moment at the end of it.
Yeah. No, whereas instead she just had a completely pointless thing where still... well, no, I'm going to come on to this in a minute because I'm going to come on to my predictions. You also said that the Master pushed the Doctor off a cliff.
Yeah, we thought that was going to happen. Or there was a rumour that she was going to get drowned. Instead, we got this whole thing of the reverse regeneration and all that.
I didn't actually know what I don't actually understand what killed the Doctor.
No, was it that...
It was that Ray thing that fired up. I don't actually know what that was.
I can't remember what happened. I don't know whether my mind just went a blur for a moment, but what actually happened to the Master?
He was killed in the same thing, I think. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I was a bit bored by that time.
I wouldn't say it was possible to get bored.
I've only got a couple of things written down from mine because then the programme started before I'd really given much thought to it. But one was that the Daleks and the Cybermen would be in it for no longer than 10 minutes. So I probably wasn't quite right there, but they were quite underwhelming, particularly the Daleks. So I think the thrust of what I was saying was probably right.
That bit with where the Master starts dancing to Rasputin.
I hate that.
That was awful.
Yeah.
And the Daleks and the Cybermen just watching on.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame because Sacha Darwin is a perfect fit for the Master.
And he did quite well in this in places, actually, with what he was given, I thought.
Yeah, but his dialogue is atrocious.
Yeah.
I think it's pitiful what they put the Master through.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that bit was really embarrassing. The key thing that I wanted to come on to next, really, which probably opened up into a bit of a wider discussion, but I've been saying all along about the whole the fob watch stuff.
Yeah.
That it was like a bad idea of Chibnall's, and he had no idea where he was going with it. It was just going to get forgotten about. And basically, the whole thrust of the big controversial story that was being introduced into it during the Chris Chibnall era was just completely swept under the carpet. The fob watch won't be in it, I wrote on here, and it wasn't.
I thought we were at least going to get to see it.
The Ruth Doctor may have shown up, but what was the point? All of that big sort of revelation, this sort of whole ripping at the past of Doctor Who and taking a big dump down its neck sort of thing that happened. It was all for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, I know. We didn't even get the Timeless Child really mentioned.
No. If you're going to do something controversial like that, you at least have the balls to see it through.
Yaz never actually found out about it.
Hmm.
What was going on there?
So to me, that was a particularly poor thing about the era, really, rather than the episode. But for the episode not to actually in any way try and resolve any of that, I don't know. It just probably says, as much as anything else, it says a lot about the Chris Chibnall era.
It does.
I don't think he had any direction at all. He had no idea where he was going with it. He was making it up as he went along. Sometimes things were entertaining. More often than not, it was just embarrassing. But you know, what do you expect when you don't have a plan? Despite the fact he did have a plan, apparently.
Yeah, there was no plan. He didn't know where the Ruth Doctor sat in the timeline. He didn't know what actually the Timeless Child. What was the point of that?
Yeah.
Look how much he screwed up Doctor Who canon.
Yeah.
And for what?
Well, you know, yeah. I mean, we know, don't we, that obviously the fact that the Ruth Doctor had a TARDIS that looks a bit like the Doctor's TARDIS, that immediately limited where she could be in the timeline.
Yeah.
But it's never been explained. Not everything does need to be explained, but that does.
It sort of does. It's
it just
quite
feels a complete
essential.
error.
Yes. I thought we were at least going to get a mention of the fob watch. I didn't think you'd be completely right with that theory. But Chibnall destroyed Doctor Who canon for no reason whatsoever. And that saddens me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he really did, didn't he? I mean, taking it wider than this episode, what do you think the Chibnall era will be remembered for?
Do you mean positively or negatively?
Both, I think.
I think positively it will be remembered for introducing the first female Doctor.
Yeah.
And taking that big risk. I think that will be its defining legacy and something that future showrunners will benefit from, with the opportunity to make the Doctor literally whoever they want the Doctor to be.
Yeah.
On the negative front, I think it will be remembered as an era that made Doctor into a bit of a laughingstock again.
Yeah.
And again made Doctor Who forgotten about by the general public a little bit. Because the show... I mean, the Peter Capaldi era started the decline, but the Chibnall era sort of escalated that even further. I think it will be remembered for its risk-taking that didn't particularly pay off with the Timeless Child.
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to get the Timeless Child become mentioned again. But I think it will definitely be remembered for it. I think it'll be remembered more on a negative front, but in time I think more people will come to support it, maybe. A bit like the Peter Capaldi era, where you had loads of people slagging it off while it was on, and then suddenly there was this resurgence.
I don't think it was ever hated as much as it is now, though.
No, I think there's more extremes now, definitely.
Yeah.
I was surprised we didn't get a Thasmin kiss.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was forgotten about as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Thankfully. Yeah, it's weird because sometimes time is quite kind to things. I mean, let's face it, the Sylvester McCoy era was a particularly bad era.
Yeah.
But people still remember that fondly.
And I think the McCoy era did a lot of good things. It's an awful era of the show, but generally it worked pretty well. In some of its ideas, it's just its execution was awful.
Do you think are there any episodes from the Chris Chibnall era that you think would make it into, say, the top 40 Doctor Who stories of all time?
No, I think there's been some alright ones like Village of the Angels and War of the Sontarans, there's no way I'd say that they were top tier Who in any sense of the word. I think there's a lot that will be in the bottom 40.
I'm really interested when they next do the next poll, actually, to see where episodes like tonight can, because when I was watching it I was thinking, to me this just feels like a big mess.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking, you can sort of imagine, because there's so many Easter eggs in there, you could just imagine Doctor Who fans all across the country getting really, really excited and wetting their pants.
They're probably just getting, I think, fan service acts as a sort of bribing mechanism sometimes, and that's definitely going to be the case here. It's why probably Day of the Doctor was voted the best episode of the entire Doctor Who history when they did that season survey poll. And for Doctor Who magazine, I think people will forget the flaws of this episode because of the things they enjoyed.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, I mean, the last Doctor Who special wasn't the best episode of Doctor Who of all time, you know, but it was really good, and it was done. It was managed really, really well, far better than this episode.
Yeah. Do you think this is the messiest Doctor Who episode of all time?
It didn't meet it didn't compete with the messiness of Flux.
Yeah, the finale of Flux.
Flux was that was pitiful television in my eyes.
Yeah, I think there was at least some merit here.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I really disliked that a lot. So, okay, so let's move on to the ending and the big reveal at the end, which was that when we saw the regeneration and we were expecting the new Doctor to appear, it wasn't the new Doctor. It was in fact an old Doctor in David Tennant.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I wasn't necessarily surprised by it. I knew that we were going to get David Tennant pop in because we knew that he was going to be the Doctor in the next episode. But it puts us in an interesting position for the future, because now David Tennant is not only the 10th Doctor, he's also technically the 11th Doctor because he regenerates into himself, but he's also the 14th Doctor.
Yeah.
And that makes David Tennant sort of, gives him a bit of an unfair advantage.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'd imagine that moment, and from what I could see from having a quick look on Twitter earlier on, that moment was pretty ecstatically received by Who fans.
It was a pretty thrilling moment.
Yeah.
It was exciting, but a very brief ending, I suppose.
Yeah, but I don't know. I loved Peter Capaldi. He's one of my favourite Doctors, but the regeneration scene for Capaldi just went on forever. I was really bored by the time it actually happened.
We finally got a regeneration scene that happened outside of the TARDIS as well, and the effect was quite good. The regeneration effect.
Yeah.
I just wish it was not orange.
Yeah, I get a bit bored of that sort of orange effect, but you know, to be fair, it did work. It did work quite well. So, what's your take home from the Chibnall era?
I would say it's been generally a huge misfire.
Yeah.
It could have done some things better than it did. I think with the female Doctor idea, with the idea of starting afresh in its first season.
But they haven't said that by the end of it. You couldn't get any further away from that.
No, I know.
That's the irony of it all.
You had the promise of an era that could have been this huge success. Instead, Chibnall screwed it up. And I think that's a shame. Because, we started off with this era that had the potential to introduce a whole wave of new fans, and ended off with one that, that episode there, if you had never watched Doctor Who before, it would mean nothing to you.
Yeah.
And that's the complete opposite of what that first season tried to be.
Yeah, no, you're right with that. I hated that first series of this era. I didn't mind the second series. Flux I thought was awful. This I thought was all right in places, but you know, nothing particularly much to write home about, I don't think. But yeah, no, it's an interesting thought. I think, funnily enough, the thing I hated about the first series of Chibnall's era was that it didn't have any form of it didn't feel like you were watching Doctor Who.
No, it felt like it was too disconnected. And I think the perfect way to resolve that would have been to have like some more obscure Classic Who villains come into it,
Yeah.
maybe like the Chronivores or the Draconians or something. Maybe gives the Daleks and the Cybermen a year off, gives the Master a year off. We had an era that tried to separate itself from Doctor Who history in its entirety, and that obviously didn't pay off. But then they completely backtracked on everything they tried to do in that first series.
Yeah. I hated the first series, to be fair. I thought it is it the worst of the series?
Yeah,
Probably is, but at the same point, it did feel like it had a little bit more of its own identity than the others did.
it did. It felt like the Flux and this series and the specials all were very much reliant on fangasm.
Yeah.
And obviously that worked because people liked it with Power of the Doctor, and people liked the fan servicey moments in Flux.
Did you like it?
What, the fan servicey?
No, the episode today.
Oh no, because I think it was a mess of a television episode.
Yeah.
But in a way, it reminded me a bit of like the Big Finish called Zagreus, where that one's got a bit more of a coherent plot, but where it's just like loads and loads of stuff from the past, and it's all thrown together, cobbled together, and it just feels like a bit of an overload. So
Yeah.
no, I wasn't. I came away from it surprisingly empty for an episode that was so full.
It's funny because I was really not looking forward to this episode at all. I was looking forward to seeing you. I wasn't looking forward to seeing
I was
the
looking
episode.
forward to watching it with you.
Yeah, me too, actually. But I enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. Just because there were a handful of moments I thought, he's nailed that bit. And I haven't really had that feeling generally. He certainly didn't nail all 90 minutes of it. I would say that he nailed the final 5.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there was a lot this episode did quite well, but there's just too much that it did poorly just to give it a merit. So, what would you say was the biggest strength of the Chris Chibnall era? Let's look at it from a positive perspective.
I think the biggest strength for it is that he did bring an element of surprise back, in that he managed to actually not announce everything.
Yeah,
Which
this
I think-
episode definitely had a lot of
Yeah,
surprises.
he did have some, but unfortunately though, because there were so many, they didn't really feel that hard hitting.
No.
But he did do them. So I think that to me is the strongest thing about Chibnall's era.
If you had
What about you?
few of those surprises, then
Yeah.
that would have been nice. I'd agree. I'd say there was a point where you could have said that his handling of returning villains was his strongest suit. But then you look at how pitiful the Sontarans were in the Vanquishers when they were addicted to chocolate, how the Daleks were reduced to being cannon fodder in this and either the Daleks and in Flux, and the Cybermen also, and the Sea Devils, how they sort of ruined the whole essence of them not really being villains, what made the Sea Devils so special. So I'd say that there were a lot of things that maybe started off as strengths that ended up as
Yeah.
weaknesses.
So where does Doctor Who go from here?
we need to see an era that brings Doctor Who back to being amazing in the moments when it's not being fan servicey.
Yeah.
So the best moments of the Chibnall era, or the moments that people like about the Chibnall era, tend to be the ones that are reliant on these big shocks or these big huge moments. So things like the return of the return of the Master in Spyfall, or the Ruth Doctor's appearance. You know, all these moments that are big, sort of jaw-dropping scenes, and we need to return to an era where there's moments that don't rely on the past, something new, but that we think, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. So, I think we probably pulled up to the end of the discussion. If there was anything else you wanted to raise?
I don't believe so.
That was good. It was nice to be back.
It is.
Looking forward to see where Doctor Who goes next.
What are your hopes for the R2D era?
I just hope that he can make it enjoyable again, to be honest.
Mm.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge lover of the RTD era. At times, he got it right where the writer was right, and I'm thinking primarily where he had Moffat as the writer and they had a little bit of a darker edge. But there was a lot of stuff as well that I really dislike about his era. But I do think he has the capability to make it a popular programme again.
I think so. Yeah.
Good.
So, shall we go on to the part of the show called Nerd Grade Report? Should we give it a Nerd Grade Report?
Let's give it a Nerd Grade Report,
Yeah. So, the Nerd Grade Report is the part of the show where we look back at whatever we've been discussing this past week and we give it a school board grade from A star to U. And what would you give it? What would be your score?
So, I am denied a little bit about this one, and I've given it a C minus because I can't give it a pass because it didn't pass with me. There was too many things I didn't like about it. There was too much that was just felt too rough around the edges. There was too much that just felt undeveloped.
Mm.
But the ending was really good, and when he got it right, Chibnall really got it right in this one. So I can't give it too low a score. So I'm just going to go just below the C. I'm going to go C minus.
Okay. I would give it a... It's a difficult one, isn't it? It really is. It doesn't pass as a piece of television, but it does pass as a celebration of Doctor Who, as I keep saying. So, I think a C minus is a fair score.
Well, there we go. So that's a C minus for Power of the Doctor. That brings our discussion to the end. We don't know when we'll next be doing a podcast, do we?
No, we don't. Probably whenever we get to see each other again.
Yeah.
And
assuming we've actually found something worth watching collectively together.
I mean, The Walking Dead's been on.
That is true, yeah.
We'll probably want to talk about that. We'll do a show at the end of the year, probably looking back at 2022's highlights and lowlights.
Yep.
And we will probably find some sort of TV show worth watching. What we do know is that the next episode of Doctor Who isn't going to be on until next November.
Yep, that's right.
Which is quite a long way away.
It's a long way away, but I think the fandom seems to be enthused.
Yeah, suitably. I think the anticipation will be kept up throughout the year. I wish it was on in New Year, though, because I don't want to have to wait a year for it. I'm very excited about what's coming next. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
We shall see.
I'm very excited. I think the future of Doctor Who is very hopeful, and it's quite relieving now to say there is no more Chibnall era Doctor Who.
It's good to see the back of that era. I mean, to be fair, that episode tonight wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
No.
But we're ready to move on. Let's give Chris Chibnall a chance. As I say, I wasn't a huge fan of his previous run. There was too many things I didn't like about it, but on the plus side, he always did make good fun television.
Did he? Good fun television. Oh, you mean Russell T Davies? Did you say? I think you said Chris Chibnall.
Oh, I didn't mean to. No, I meant Russell T Davies.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think we're going to get an era that brings Doctor Who back to being fun again.
Yeah.
Which is primarily what I want. I want to have an era like his first era, where there's funny stories, where there's scary stories, where there's bombastic stories, and they're all sort of coming together, and they're all nice and great. And
I agree. So, on that note, I've been Mark.
And I've been Lewis. It's been a pleasure, and it feels sad whenever we get to the end of one of these shows, because we know that it's not coming back next week.
It's not, no. We won't see you next week.
No. We will see you another time.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. We'll geek again.